Hello and welcome to the Franchise Tag Fantasy Show recap, proudly sponsored by AAA Sports, the official UK home for betting for the NFL. Head over to aaasports.com. They've got all your needs for the playoffs and leading up to the Super Bowl. So go and check that out. Adam, it's another one. It's another recap. We did quarterbacks last week. We're on to the running backs this week. I have a bonus little bet for you. There it is.
What have you got?
You didn't know about that. Today, we've got the NFL playoff special, most playoff rushing yards. Talk me through it. I know I've sprung it on you as always, but let's talk about it. Let's get this little bonus bet in before we start talking about fantasy.
Okay. So we have got Christian McCaffrey. I can't see the odds because I haven't got them on my laptop, but you're going to have to tell me what the odds are for these guys. But I'm guessing McCaffrey is top because he'll probably win it.
Well, you say that, but he's 7-4. He's already got a game in the books, hasn't he? He's already up 120 yards, whatever it is, isn't he? So he's got an advantage over the second place person of Miles Sanders, who hasn't even played yet. Got no yards in the locker yet. So it's a bit of an odd one, but there is the chance. It's the playoffs. What if the 49ers don't get through this round? The odds after Christian McCaffrey, everything's 10 plus. So let's live in a world where the 49ers don't get through this round. You think where's your money at after that?
I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it, to sort of go down this route because we all know that McCaffrey's going to get it. It's a really tough one. I don't really like any of them. Keep going down. Keep going down. It
doesn't get much better.
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, I suppose. Do you know? If you are, I mean, I'm not. No, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. McCaffrey's going to win this easily.
You're just taking the 7-4 bet.
Yeah. I just don't like any of them. There's nothing there. I was trying to think maybe like you could go down
the other side,
sort of like a Zeke or a Tony Pollard if you really like the way that the Cowboys to go through. But I don't like them for it. So I don't think they're going to go anywhere. All the quarterbacks aren't going to rush enough in order to win, so they're a complete waste of time. Travis Etienne, I don't think you're going to find. The problem is you're looking realistically. You've probably got to think to yourself, the teams that are most likely to go through are the 49ers, the Eagles, the Chiefs, and I would argue personally the Bengals, but I think most people would go the Bills. So you could probably include them. So you're basically down to them 5. I don't particularly like Sanders because of Hurts. I don't particularly like Pacheco because of McKinnon. The Bills, I mean, you've got Singletary and Cook, so you've got 2. It's McCaffrey. There's nothing else there. This is a waste of time. It's McCaffrey all the way. Go to AAA and back Christian McCaffrey at 7-4. No one is getting near him.
To be fair, they're not bad odds. The fact that he's already got 120 yards in the bag, and the next closest is Etienne, who we think possibly the Jags might go out next round. He's got 100 yards on his next opponent anyway. 7-4, right there. You got to be thinking that there's some good odds to take on him, aren't they?
There is. I think maybe the reason that he's still a little bit bigger is because the Eagles were the number 1 seed and people think that they'll win and go through and we'll get to the Super Bowl. So in theory, they will play the Super Bowl, but then they didn't play in the last round. So, it's still an even amount of games. I think McCaffrey's going to be pretty much there, isn't he? All the time the 49ers are there. McCaffrey's going to be the main guy. you'll see little bits from Elijah Mitchell and little bits from Jordan Mason, but really, you could see McCaffrey hitting 100 yards in every one.
Every game, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, that's that little bit of fun over right there. Adam is pointing everybody to 888 Sports to get on Christian McCaffrey at 7-4.
Yeah, definitely go for it.
Let's talk fantasy then. On to why we're here. All those months of slaving away and watching the waiver wire and drafting and all the work that goes into it. Let's talk about the players. Let's start off with best value. Adam, who have you got for best value this year?
So best value for this year, I sort of came up with a few names. Obviously, we kind of base it, obviously value is where they've been drafted or where you picked them up. There's a few guys that I thought you could argue for. One that is going to be a bit of a common theme throughout a few of these actually is Tyler Algier. I think that he did very well this year. He was actually the running back 47 he was drafted as. Finished as the running back 28. So nothing major, nothing amazing, but I felt like he did very well. Another one that kind of seemed like an obvious choice to me was Tony Pollard. I think the fact that you could get him drafted as the running back 35 in most leagues, or roughly around that sort of mark, and finished the running back 7. So he actually made a massive difference to your league. If you could get like that guy in that position, I mean, running back 35, I mean, you're probably talking what, like 9th, 10th round, around that sort of area, and yet became the running back 7 and did better than did better than some of the first picks off the board. So I think for him, he definitely deserves a mention. But the guy that I had to pick, and I kind of had to pick him because he ruined my fantasy season a little bit, because he took everything away from DeAndre Swift. And that was Jamal Williams. For me, in most leagues, it came up that he was drafted 52nd running back, finished as the RB9, had, I think it was it 14 touchdowns, I think he had. 15 rushing touchdowns for the season, 994 yards. So not like loads of yards, but still pretty decent. And, I mean, any running back that's going to get you 15 touchdowns in the season is going to be pretty impressive for your fantasy team, especially one that you picked up probably round 12, round 13, that kind of mark. Yeah, just very good from Williams, and I think that he was definitely the best value this year.
Yeah, I like your idea of Tony Pollard. I ummed and ahed with that one, but before the season started, there was a lot of people saying Pollard's the guy there. Expect a big season from him. So in my head, I was a little bit like, I was expecting a big season from him. So he's kind of done what I thought. I tend to be a bit biased when it comes to things like this, and I was going along the lines of Saquon Barkley for my best value, because he wasn't everybody's first choice. So he wasn't a first choice running back. He was usually slotted in as an RB2 in most people's teams. They picked him up in potentially the late second round, early third round. So, and he finished as the running back 6. So for me, 227 points, 14 points a game. I think that he was good value. I think that was great value. And like I said, he wasn't one of those. He's finished with the guys that were all first picks. So I've gone with Saquon Barkley as my best value.
Yeah, I'm not really having that. I'm sorry. That's just like, I mean, I get that he did very well, and obviously, RB6, great and all that. He was the RB11 in most leagues, and like he obviously, I understand what you mean that he wasn't sort of like pick first, but overall position was 17th. I mean, that's basically the middle of the second, isn't it? And he's obviously shown some value because he's come higher than what he was drafted at. But I'm going that there were better ones.
Well, maybe I've got this person slotted in best value, because I'm going to go first this time for my biggest surprise. Because it's sheerly because I don't need to say much. I actually put Jamal Williams in for my for my biggest surprise. It didn't expect loads from him. He was always going to be the running back too. And if Swift was fit, I thought he was going to have all of the ball all of the time. There was points in there towards the back end of the season when Swift was fit and Williams still took the ball, which is something that was a big surprise to me. I thought, Swift would always be, if healthy, RB1, and Williams proved that he could do it. And it was good to hear him chat at the end of the year and talk about his season and being another man's treasure. So he's locked in there for my biggest surprise. As you said, 7th best running back, 213 points, averaging 12 points a game, knocked in all those touchdowns. Absolutely fantastic. My biggest surprise.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we said with the quarterbacks last week, it feels like best value and biggest surprise kind of come pretty close together. For me, it was Tyler Algier for the biggest surprise. I have to say, I didn't expect him to do what he did. 900 yards, 4 touchdowns, finished as the RB28, despite the fact that most people drafted him at 47. He was the fifth round pick in the draft, I believe, for the Falcons. And we had a lot of rookies come out this year at running back. We had Walker, we had Damon Pierce, Breece Hall. There was a lot of hype around these guys. Brian Robinson, there was a lot of hype around before the season as well. And I think that what we didn't expect was someone like Algier. I think maybe people who had watched him in college might say differently, but I think a lot of us probably didn't think that he would be quite as high as what he was, which is probably why he got drafted where he got drafted. But yeah, I mean, he had a really good season. I think a lot of it is probably down to the fact that he's got himself a head coach who just wants to run the ball as much as possible. But that obviously showed that he was, he is a talented running back. And although the touchdowns might not be there so much, the fact is that the workload and the yards are, which means that it won't, it's not that difficult necessarily to get them touchdowns come in. So I think it's just a good player who we didn't think was going to be as good as what he did. And there's nothing really to stop him next year from kicking on and doing a similar thing, or if not better.
Yeah, he definitely ended the season strong. He took his chance, didn't he? Because I think if Cordarrelle Patterson hadn't got injured at the start of the season, we may not have seen as much of Algier, and that's why potentially he's a big surprise, because they had to use him earlier than probably expected. I know there was a lot of chatter prior to the fantasy draft, when everybody drafts, of a lot of chat about this guy, about how he could be valuable to you. So there was a few people that pegged him to have a bit of a decent season, and it really showed. And I think he'll be off the board pretty early next year. We'll definitely want to keep an eye on for 2023 fantasy. I just felt there wasn't enough of a surprise from him. For me, he kind of had to step up and do his bit, and there was times where he went missing, which is why I didn't lock him in there, but definitely deserves the shot there. Now, as we said, they're the good points of the season. We'll move on to the bad points. So we'll move on to your biggest disappointment, Adam.
So I think that there's a few, and as a kind of similar with the quarterbacks, and I think you'll probably find it all the way through, a lot of this is going to be due to injuries. That is partly the reason why you end up with such a disappointment. I feel like Jonathan Taylor was a massive disappointment for anyone who picked him in the first position for a hell of a lot of leagues. Really kind of struggled with injuries this year, but also when he was actually playing, struggled as well. So I do feel like he struggled. Like I say, drafted number 1 in a lot of leagues, finished as 33. I mean, he played 11 games, so, he did miss 6 of them. But even still, when he was out there, just didn't really seem like the Jonathan Taylor from the year before. And another one, very similar sort of thought process, Javonte Williams, obviously cost a lot of people. He was someone that a lot of people picked up very early on in the first couple of rounds. I think most of them were in the second round. Finished as the 84th running back because he only played in 4 games, so that was tough. But the one who I feel like when I look at it, I kind of had to come up with someone who has played the majority of the season. And as I said, Jamal Williams did very well and killed it. DeAndre Swift was a disappointment for anyone who drafted him, including me. He was the 8th running back off the board. I took him, I think, at the beginning of the second round in our league, but that he was, like I say, the 8th running back there. He finished as the 25th running back, but he played in 14 games, so only actually missed out in 3 whole games. I feel like that's a fair enough amount of time for you to come out and actually claim that he was the biggest disappointment. Just didn't get the goal line work. Jamal Williams took over the goal line work very early on in the season and just really struggled to kind of get going. Kind of felt like he wasn't being used as much as what he could be used because they didn't need to because they had Jamal Williams. And it all just kind of fell away a little bit. And when it's someone, in your first couple of picks in your draft and they finish outside of basically the top end of RB3. I mean, that's not what you want from your guy who, this is meant to be your RB1 kind of thing. There was a lot of hope for Swift that he was going to push on and become a much bigger name. So, yeah, it was a real shame for him and certainly the biggest disappointment personally and for many other people as well.
Yeah, I was nearly locked someone in straight away for this, but I thought I was being a little bit harsh, and it was another personal one for me. I thought anybody who went quite high on Najee Harris, with the fact that he had such a good season last year, and there was quite a lot of expectation that he'd see like a good 90% of the snaps be used in running, in catching, in an offense where we thought maybe they've got a rookie quarterback, he might see a bit more of the ball than usual. And for the first 11 weeks, 10 weeks, he barely got over 10 points, which if you held on to him for that long and he's your RB1, you struggled at the start of the year, I think. It wasn't until the back end of the season that he started getting points. I feel like those back end of the season points saved him from being the biggest disappointment for me because he plugged on and got people into playoff positions. I actually did put Jonathan Taylor as my biggest disappointment, despite the fact he was injured, because there was only in the 11, 12 games that he played, there was only 3 of them he scored respectable points in my eyes. As a number 1 pick, he had 3 games where he scored around the 18 to 20 something mark. So for me, that's got to be a disappointment. If you're coming first off the board and in the games that you were healthy, you should be up towards that 20 mark in every single game, shouldn't you? So for me, I did actually lock in Jonathan Taylor as my biggest disappointment.
Yeah, I think when you look at Taylor, like you say, I mean, he averaged 10.8, which, as you say, I mean, it's not just like whatever team's RB1. It's like he was the RB1 in the draft. It's like he was the guy that certainly was the number 1 in ours. I think he was, the number 1 in the vast majority. I know some people might have gone for McCaffrey, but the majority would have gone for Jonathan Taylor. And yeah, just didn't work out at all. Was really disappointing, and just don't know. It just kind of felt like he kind of embodied the whole of the Colts season, to be honest, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, they tried something different to what they did last year, and it definitely didn't work, did it?
Yeah.
They struggled to even get him going in games, and it's a bit of a shame. I suppose he was a safer option at the start of the year of gambling of whether McCaffrey would actually produce the goods or stay fit or healthy. So, for me, it was a safe bet at number 1. Glad I didn't have it, but I feel like you're going to repeat another name as you got him in a biggest surprise. Who are you putting in for your best rookie, Adam?
So I'm not. I know that I've mentioned Algier quite a lot, but I'm not going to go for him in this one because I feel like there was so many rookies that kind of did very, very well that, there are kind of the other ones that you have to go for. Of Look, if injury hadn't have happened, then Breece Hall would have won this by a mile. He was averaging 13.7 points a game. He was drafted number 20, but he actually finished as the RB40. So you think he only played 7 games and he still finished as the RB40. So that just goes to show you he would have won this by a mile. But obviously injured was a problem. To me, when I was looking at it and going through the sort of stats and stuff, it feels very much like Dameon Pierce and Kenneth Walker were actually quite similar. They're in kind of similar places. But to me, there was one guy who I felt was much more explosive and also who I feel is probably going to make a bigger difference as well in the future, and that was Kenneth Walker. I just felt like he did more. He was more of a value to you. You drafted him as the 37th running back. He finished as the 17th. He averaged 11.7 points a game. I know he kind of dipped off towards the end, but it just kind of felt like he had that bit more about him. And I don't know if it's a weird one because obviously the Texans kind of just ran the ball as well. And we always go on about the Seahawks, how all Pete Carroll wants to do is run the ball all the time. So it felt like a bit of a strange one that they weren't, they do feel very equal. But for me, I just kind of felt like Kenneth Walker just was that little bit extra, was a little bit better than what Dameon Pierce was. And although Pierce had a couple of good games, I kind of felt like he was steady, but in a pretty bad offense. So yeah, I kind of went with Walker, but I do feel like they're both very similar.
Yeah, I went down the same process as you. I was looking between Pierce and Walker. That's who it was going to be for me. I just felt like, although it took Kenneth Walker 4 weeks to get going, I felt like the Seahawks went down a bit of a safer route with him and didn't really use him for the first 4 weeks. So I'm cancelling them out of his scores and saying, when did they start giving him more of the ball? And that for me was week 5 onwards. And that week 5 to week sort of 12, he was up there scoring the points of your RB1 of someone who was selected in the draft off of the board within the first 6 picks. And for that reason, you've got to kind of slot him in. He took a knock towards the end of the season. It sort of shook him a little bit and his points sort of faded a little bit. But that middle block where there was consistent scores every single week wins it for me. I felt Pierce, there was games where he disappeared for no reason and the scores just weren't there, where he was sub 10 points, played the whole game. You didn't really get this with Walker. You got good production, good points from him in the games that he was healthy and playing and fit. So I put in Walker as well for that. And again, I think it'll be a good battle next year to see whether it's Hall or Walker of the best of the year 2s as well. So I think that'll be interesting to see. So yeah,
it will be. I mean, the biggest concern with Hall is obviously coming back from the injury that he had. I mean, it sounds like it's relatively similar to what Saquon had, and that obviously we saw what he was like last year and how he really struggled to get back into it. But then this year has sort of come back to how we remember it. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how Hall does. But there is, for the future, certainly for next season, there is big risk when it comes to Hall and seeing how he does. So hopefully he'll come back fit and be all right. But yeah, it does kind of feel like Walker is probably the one who's most likely to do well next year, if not, for the future because of the injury.
Yeah, I think Seahawks got something going, haven't they? Really, they surprised a lot of us and can build on that now. Now on to the best waiver wire target. I think we've got the same name in here, but let's find out.
I've got 4.
Okay. Well, I guarantee I've got one of them then.
Yeah. So I was, there's a lot of them because there were a lot of these guys that got picked up, especially at running back, especially in our league. When you do end up losing them, you have to pick up these guys. Mentioned him multiple times. Tyler Algier, again, I think, you saw him on the waiver wire at times, was very good. I remember picking up Jeff Wilson. I think that was the one, wasn't it? Week 2 for the 49ers. Was it Mitchell went down, didn't he, in the first week? And everyone was after Jeff Wilson. I remember picking him up. He was the RB29 over the season, played 16 games. Not all for the 49ers, obviously, but for Miami as well. Did pretty well for the season. So I liked him. I wanted to just have a quick mention of Donta Foreman. I know Freddie picked him up in our league. He did well as well, was the RB32 and played 17 games. But, all these guys were decent pickups to get. Have I named your name yet?
Not yet.
So the one that I finally went for was Jerick McKinnon. Now, the reason I went for McKinnon, he's the RB26 on the season. But he actually played in all 17 games, which I was a little surprised about because you didn't really see much of him in the beginning of the season. But he was drafted as the 71st running back overall and was, essentially not drafted, to be honest, was the thing. But from week 13, and this is roughly around the time that you would have picked him up just before then, 9 touchdowns in 6 weeks, averaging 14.2 points a game. Some of them games, I think that I saw there was a 25-point game, a 26-point game. He had a couple of games where he was a bit off. But as we've seen with McKinnon, it seems to be a common theme with what he does. He doesn't get involved that much. There ends up being an injury in Kansas City, and then he just completely takes over. It would be fascinating to see how he did from the beginning. Like if they actually gave him the job, but they probably won't. So it's a shame that we don't see that. But yeah, for me, McKinnon was the best waiver wire pickup, and just especially in them last 6 weeks, as you were going for a title possibly or trying to win your championship. I mean, that's exactly the sort of person you want to pick up and the sort of stats that you want from your running back.
Yeah, as you said, he played all the games. He was in the season. So he was definitely on the waiver wire because no one stashed him away to week 13, hoping that maybe he might come good. You'd got rid of him. He was sat. So if you did manage to pick him up week 13, yes, there's a strong possibility you then qualify for the playoffs, even if you were not in them. It was a great pickup. I remember sort of that back end 13, 14, 15. We did lose a couple of the running backs, so to pick him up would have been great. You say it'd be interesting to see if they'd used him from like they have done from the start. He's not overly been getting all of his points in the rushing game, has he? He's been getting them in receiving, and was it 7 consecutive games with a touchdown as well? So I bet they just wished they'd started using him as an option early doors. But definitely, you got week 13. If you got him after that, as you said, I locked him in straight away. I didn't even need to look at anybody. I didn't look at anybody else when I thought best waiver wire target. I was like, look, I banged on about this guy all back end of the year when it came to on the betting show. So yeah, he was an easy one for me. That was.
Yeah, I think what would just be interesting, like you say, he's not really involved in the rushing that much when you actually look at it. But because like of his 9 touchdowns he had in them 6 weeks, 8 of them were passing touchdowns. So he's not a massive point scorer when it comes to the rushing side of it. And obviously the Chiefs have got Pacheco who are playing at the moment, who we didn't even mention for the rookie one either, but has done relatively well as well. But I think with McKinnon, it would I just think it would be interesting if they did that, if they kind of went from the beginning. But the thing is that they don't need to, do they? Because it's all working, and then they can use McKinnon as someone later on down the line, which is all going to be new plays that no one's going to have seen before. So I'm guessing that's kind of their mentality of it. But I mean, he's clearly an amazing weapon for the Chiefs, and just a shame that we don't get him all season and we only get him at the end. So yeah,
makes you wonder next year whether what we're going to see from Clyde Edward-Helaire, who started the season off fantastically. I remember him being big for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that, and then tailed off, then got injured. then all of a sudden Pacheco's great and McKinnon works well with him. So maybe they trade him. Who knows? Maybe he finds a new home. Maybe he finds a home at Cincinnati Bengals playing with Joe Burrow again.
You never know. You never know.
He likes to get all his mates in. Now we've left the best award till last, the MVP. We went a bit prematurely on it last week and put it in the middle, but we've saved it till the end for this show. Adam, I'm calling it already. You've definitely got the same person as me. So hit me with your MVP.
So I think there's a few that you could argue for here. I think Derrick Henry is certainly one you could argue for. He averaged 17.1 points a game, did pretty well, finished as the RB4. He had 13 touchdowns, and then you could argue for him. I think he basically got the Titans to where they got to be honest, which is obviously just outside the playoffs, but he was the offense. So you feel like he did well. Christian McCaffrey, obviously, for the 49ers, did really well. My guy, Austin Eckler, love Austin Eckler, did really well, had another 15 touchdowns. Great in the receiving game as well. But I feel that there's only really one guy, and there's multiple reasons for it as well. Josh Jacobs was the number one running back, so it feels like it would be a bit harsh if we didn't go for him. He had over 1,600 yards in rushing, which was the most of anyone in the league. He had 12 touchdowns, which is a little bit light, but bear in mind he was playing for the Raiders, so it's sometimes difficult with them. So Jacobs did really well. He had a little bit in the receiving game, not a lot, but he had nearly 400 yards in the receiving game. Just did incredibly well. In most leagues, he was drafted as the RB22, which was essentially the back end of the fourth or the early fifth round, and you got the number one running back. And it's a strange one because obviously, you've got this guy, he's in his contract year, they haven't signed him. He's completely free agent now. Now that their season is finished, anyone can take him. And it all kind of felt a bit weird, like he had a point to prove, and he very much proved it.
I've had him in fantasy a fair few times in his short career in the NFL. I had him last year, and I think he's a great running back. I know you were out on him when we discussed prior to the season starting. We discussed him. You were a little bit out on him, so he must have been a bit of a surprise for you this season as well with the scores he came up with. But I haven't got him as my MVP.
Oh, okay.
I've got your boy Austin Eckler as my MVP. I just felt for me there was 5 or 6 games where Jacobs went missing. I think did he have 4 games sub 10 points? Another couple around the 10, 11 points.
I'm not too sure, but he did have a bit of a patch, didn't he?
Didn't he? Yeah, he had that one game where he got like 50 odd points.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's boosting his average up and his total score up, because for me that there was, I think I'm going to go with 5 definitely average to disappointing scores for a player, whereas Austin Eckler had one bad week. It was week 1, and he scored 11.2 points. After that, the scores are all fantastic. 18s, 34, 35, 24, 36, 24. It doesn't ever drop below 13 then for the rest of the season. And for me, that makes you an MVP. To be that consistent and score that highly every single week, that for me gives you the MVP stat. So yeah, I really thought you were putting Austin Eckler. I know you love him. You do anything to have him on your fantasy team every year. You've got a signed ball in your house from him because you love him that much for fantasy. He won it for you last year.
He did.
You haven't had the respect to lock him in as MVP.
I think to me, I just felt like Jacobs had more of an effect on the team as well. Like I felt like for the Raiders, it very much was Jacobs and Devontae Adams, and that was it. Like, because Waller was injured, Renfro was injured. That obviously they had other weapons, but it just wasn't really that much there. Jacobs was so huge for them, and maybe I was probably looking more just in the rushing side of things, but I just felt like Jacobs, although he did have a few down weeks, he just was, just so good for that Raiders offense that has, I mean, let's face it, we all know the Raiders have struggled to quite a bit this year, and it kind of felt like he was kind of keeping them together a little bit. That was the thing with him. Eckler, as wonderful as he is, you've got, I know Keenan Allen missed a lot of time, but Keenan Allen was there at the end for them for quite a few, a good 7 or 8 games at the end of it. Really showed up. Mike Williams was there for quite a bit of it as well. I just felt like there was more weapons, even like your Josh Palmers and your DeAndre Carters. I just felt like they had more and did more than what what the rest of the team did for the Raiders. And so Jacobs kind of had more of it on his back. Obviously, he had a lot more attempts. When you look at it, I mean, he had the most attempts in the whole league. But yeah, they're both very worthy winners of it, obviously. But I just felt like Jacobs, for me, did quite a lot. And Eckler, like I say, love him to bits, but not quite as much on this one.
Well, that concludes our running backs then, Adam. Another great little chat about that. Next week, we have got wide receivers. I'm really looking to chatting about the wide receivers. I think that's the best category for me when it comes to fantasy at the minute. It's definitely where I'm going down the route next year as well. We will be back tomorrow night with the betting show. We'll be going through all those odds at 888, giving you all the best odds for the playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl. So tune in for that, guys. Thanks for joining me for another fantasy show. Until tomorrow, thank you.